Hello, everyone, and welcome to DevSecCon London. We're a chapter of the global DevSecCon community, an inclusive community that educates and enables developers in application security. Coming up, we'll be joined by Stefania Chaplin, who is a solutions architect at Gitlab, and they'll be talking about changing culture. Let's break down some silos. But before we dive into that, I want to quickly introduce myself. So I'm Waleed, and I'm a community manager here at Sneak, and the human working behind the scenes to make sure that everything runs smoothly and doesn't break. We'd love to hear your feedback so we can continue improving. So follow us on Twitter, DevSecCon, or find us on Discord as well. So if you head to the DevSecCon website, you can find us there too. So Discord's actually the best place for your feedback, and we're constantly improving as well. And it's a great place to interact with our speakers and fellow community members. So if you haven't signed up yet, head to the DevSecCon website and just join. And for this conference talk especially, it's the DevSecCon UK channel which you want to join. And Stefania will be there for the rest of her life answering questions if you need. So once the session is over, you'll be able to rewatch it on our website, share it with friends and colleagues, or everyone really. So DevSecCon is brought to you by Sneak, and our aim is to create a vendor-neutral space to share knowledge and best practices with regards to software security. Now that is out of the way, I have the absolute pleasure of bringing Stefania Chaplin on. Here's my favorite solutions architect. How you doing, Stefania?
Hey, Wally, thanks for the introduction. I'm doing really well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, it's good. It's miserable outside, but it's happy over here. So very, very excited and everything. It's the best time we've had you here, but you are very, very active in the DevSecOps community, aren't you?
Yeah, so I do like a lot of stuff. So I've been working within AppSec and DevSecOps probably about the last kind of 4 or 5 years. I used to be a developer before that, and I do a lot of public speaking, all in the aim of, evangelizing and teaching people about these things because I think they're pretty cool, and also about diversity as well, which is the reason that sometimes I burn myself out a little bit because I'm like, yes, I want to speak. Maybe I'll encourage someone somewhere. So yeah, always feel free. I've got my social channels on my talk. Feel free to reach out. Always welcome.
Oh, absolutely. I was going to say, so tell us more about so it's DevSecOps that sort of you run under, right?
Yes, so I am a bit like DevSecOps. I am DevStefOps because you can't have DevOps without Steph. So mainly within the security space, because I always find that when you're speaking to people, first they become passionate about security and then they become paranoid. And I've seen myself do that journey. First I didn't know anything and I'm like, oh, this is cool. This is so cool. Oh my God, the world's gonna end. So yeah, it's definitely a journey. But I do kind of lots of stuff like public speaking. I'm writing an article at the moment about improving diversity and DevOps. So all the fun stuff.
Amazing. I mean, so is the best way to sort of get in touch with you and just chat to you and everything through things like Twitter or?
Yeah, so I've got, you'll see on my slides, they'll be at the bottom. So feel free to follow me. I've got Twitter, YouTube, Instagram. I've got my LinkedIn. I don't know if I've got my email in my slides, but those are probably the best. I've joined the Discord channel. So I'll be on there, as you said, answering questions for the rest of my life.
Excellent. Well, hey, you are far more valuable than me right now, so please do take the floor. I'm going to share your screens and run away. And if we have any questions, I will either politely pop up or I will save them to the end, depending on what you fancy. Yep.
Perfect.
Amazing.
Well, what I'll say is I only have one screen, so I can only see this. So maybe if people want to ask questions, that'll be great. And then I'll do them at the end because I do have a section for Q&A. I'll probably be talking for maybe, I don't know, we'll see, 30, 40 minutes. So there'll be lots of time for Q&A at the end because I want to get, interactive and hear what people want to know. I always find the question section the most interesting for me. So anyway, today I am going to talk about changing culture. Let's break down some silos. My name is Stefania Chaplin, also known as DevSecOps. I am a solutions architect at Gitlab, and at the bottom of the screen, you can see all my channels. So feel free to follow, reach out. I'm always interested to hear what, get feedbacks, hear what people think, etc. So, agenda. I always keep my agenda purposefully vague. But first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. Who am I? What are we here talking about? So, what is DevSecOps? What is culture? What are common pain points? Who are we talking about? When we talk about DevSecOps, we think of development, security operations, but also within the wider realm of the organization. And how are we gonna fix this? What are we gonna do? And I've got some references to some, I don't know, some of the stuff that I've read that I found really interesting. So happy to share with everyone. And also why we're here. Why do we care? Like a so what, etc. A little summary, and then time for Q&A. And I've also got little sections with a quiz. I did this talk once and they gave me books. So actually this used to be prizes. But anyway, we can keep it interactive and it'd be interesting to hear what people say. I'm not like smooth enough to have one of those like polls you can have, like, so, you can type in the chat and we can kind of talk about it as well. So who am I? I used to be a developer. So I was Python, doing a lot of scripts, backend, scraping websites for a startup. I also did a lot of Java when I was doing uni, and then like a bit afterwards. And I even did a bit of C, but I don't like to talk about that. Obviously, trying not to offend anyone in the room, but for me, I don't like to allocate memory before I've even started the project. So that's another one. Then I moved to the world of security. So this was looking at software composition analysis. So for example, any of the components that you get, well, your open source components from whether it's NPM, PyPy, Maven Central, any security or licensing associated with that and compliance. And then I went to work for a security training company called Secure Code Warrior. And then it was very much, upskilling developers, training them, helping them level up, because I might touch on this a bit. Yeah, I will anyway. But we don't want developers to become security, and we don't want security to become developers. They each have their skill sets, but it's about finding a way that we can communicate and work together. And then now I work at Gitlab, which is the DevOps platform. It's pretty awesome. I'm not here to talk about Gitlab, but if you do want to find out about Gitlab, feel free to reach out. When I am, I don't have that bit, but anyway, when I'm not at working, I had a little emoji, but I must have removed it. I like surfing. I'm into yoga, and I have a lot of tropical plants, so I can kind of show you that literally I am surrounded right now. So yeah, that's a little bit about who am I. So enough about me. What are we here to talk about? What is DevSecOps? And I think that's quite an important definition, because traditionally we think of DevSec and operations, but there are more layers to it. And when we talk about changing culture, what do we mean by culture? Like what can we do to change it? And also common pain points, because when we have, when we try and have DevSecOps, but if it's not working, that can usually be friction, frustration. It can be a little bit tricky. So first, little quiz. What is DevSecOps? I start off easy, so hopefully people listening should have an idea, at least, for them, what is DevSecOps. But I found a definition that I quite liked. So traditionally, DevSecOps stands for development, security, and operations. Makes sense. However, it's not about just the tech. It's actually an approach to culture. You really need to think about the people. You can't have DevSecOps isn't just buying loads of tools and saying, "Hey, we do DevSecOps." We did an IT transformation. We got these new tools in. If you're still using waterfall methodologies and processes, you're going to really struggle. And that's another piece when it comes to automation. Platform design, it's taking a lot of more of a holistic view of DevSecOps, because you're integrating security, but also as a shared responsibility, because there are many surveys out there when they speak to development, security, IT organizations, and it's who's responsible for security. And everyone has a habit of pointing at other people, because security developers may say, "Oh yeah, security needs to deal with that." But then security say, "Well, developers, you're the ones introducing these vulnerabilities. You need to fix it." And actually, it's all about everyone fixing it. So I prefer this one because it's a bit more holistic. And also throughout the entire IT life cycle, because, historically, we might have thought about, I don't know, a Java app. Java application. And then we had mobile. And then now with the growth of cloud, we've got, for example, infrastructure as code. And if you are, if you're provisioning environments, are you scanning those using tools like, for example, I think Chekhov is one of them, just to make sure that you're not introducing these vulnerabilities? Because the thing about cloud is, historically, this was a bit before my time, but I speak to some of my colleagues in the industry, and they say that, you might have to ask someone, do they have a screwdriver? And I've never had to ask that in my professional life, because you used to have physical servers. Whilst now, with everything in the cloud, it's much a case of, oh, okay, can we just write a script for that? The problem with that is one mistake affects thousands or more of servers. So you've got to really be careful, not only looking at development of applications like code, but also the way that we're provisioning our environments as well. So what is culture? So I'm going to go a little bit CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, on you. And we have our, value system, and we've got our beliefs. And this in general, and this is on a personal level, this can be on a team level, can be on an organizational level. But we have, our thoughts and we have our values and beliefs, and they will frame our thoughts. And then our thoughts become our actions, and actions can become habits, and habits become culture. So if you are, if you start off with bad, or not bad, but, not smoothed out, not streamlined culture, maybe you've got a culture of fear, lack of psychological safety, then it's going to trickle down. And you have that example. I was reading an interesting case study, for example, Nokia. I always thought that they kind of, didn't do so well because of, the iPhone and the moving in technology. But actually, it was a case of, at the very top level, they were really, I say tough, psychological, lack of psychological safety, very fear culture. So then what happened is middle management, then, because they didn't want to report up, and, with all the problems, they started to hide things. And you don't want to have that. You want to have a culture where you feel safe, where you can report issues, and you can do it in a constructive way. So, for example, if there is a problem, you have an incident, you've got your incident response team, what do you do afterwards? Do you point fingers? I hope not. You might sit with key people in there and be like, okay, what went wrong? How do we make sure this doesn't go wrong? And that also leads into the whole site reliability engineering and talking about toil, and I'll come to that in a minute. But when we have this cultural transformation, you can see it, it starts with people. You have to have leadership behavior. You kind of have the bottom down as well. And then once you have this change in learning, leading to behavior, the systems, processes, you get the results. But if you haven't got, if you miss one of those steps, like if the leader, like in the Nokia example, if the leadership behavior is, not as evenly spaced or lacking, then the result, it's going to skew the results. So it's really important to think about, literally take it back, think about, values and beliefs, and how that shapes our habits and behaviors. So, common pain points that I'm going to talk about today. So when it's going a bit wrong, you have people working in silos, and this results in friction and finger pointing. And I can see this coming from both the development side and the security side. I can see kind of both perspectives about why they both think what they think. And it's even I say silly things like terminology, like lexicon, the way that we communicate. So for example, I have friends in tech, but I was talking with a lead developer, and I was talking to them about username enumeration. And I was like, oh, do you know what that is? And then they started talking about, going through usernames and like typing them and, down that rabbit hole. I'm like, okay, so yes, what you've said is logical, and I agree. That username enumeration can mean what you said. From a security perspective, what it means is the simple way. This is actually, I see these bugs in real life. I'm not really a bug catcher, but this is one of the ones I can do just on my mobile. If you're logging in and you put in your username and password and you get your password wrong, if the site you're trying to access says password is wrong, now the hacker knows they have a good username, so then they can start to brute force password. The correct secure approach would be to say username and password, or username and or password is wrong. And because otherwise you you end up being a vulnerability risk, but also from a development perspective, because I remember writing the code, it's like, if password is wrong, print password is wrong. Makes sense. But from a security perspective, you think from the other way. So anyway, because of these silos and not communicating, you end up with friction and finger pointing. And also security as an afterthought. So poor data integrity, because security isn't a bolt-on. You really need to have security, security from the beginning, design. Like, are you thinking about threat modeling before you even start coding? I know the latest OWASP, so the OWASP 2021, the new number 4 is insecure design, and that's kind of that's the first time that we're starting to think about design as part of the top 10 vulnerabilities, because security as a bolt-on isn't going to work. And then also, especially if you're just bolting on lots of different things, lots of different tools, where are you storing the data? And also, how does security know what bugs developers are working on? Because that's the thing. I'm not going to say it keeps me up at night, but it is a wider question. If you're interested in the answer, I can tell you about GitLab. But anyway, moving on. And the final one, retention and recruitment. When people are frustrated, guess what? They're probably going to look around. We've had COVID. People talk about right now as the time of the Great Resignation. IT is a growth area. There is a skill shortage. So if you have good developers, or just any developers, you want to keep them, and you want them to be happy. And I'll talk about it in a bit. But when we look at the 5 ideals of DevOps, one of them is just as simple as being in a state of flow. Like, if I can get if I can code and I can get my build running, then I can start to create value. It creates this like lovely, cycle, and I'm going to have a, much better day. I think it was about a few weeks ago. I'm in London. The weather was similar to how it is now, very, very gray. And I did what you're not supposed to do. I work remotely, and I literally spent about 2 days trying to get this pipeline running, and I didn't understand why it wasn't running. And it was just, I had this massive to-do list, and number 1, get the pipeline running. 2 days later, and I was, I said to my manager later, I was like, by Wednesday morning, I was literally like, is this the right job for me? Like, I can't even do this. It was a bad time. But anyway, retention is important, and also recruitment. As everyone wants to do more stuff, so how do we do that? We make our processes better. We can also, utilize technology, and we can, hire more. So, if we have a software development lifecycle that is creaky and not working and frictiony and not secure, it might be a bit tougher. If you have a, switched on developer that asks the right questions, might be a bit of a turnoff, So who are we talking about? So we have the traditional, we've got DevSecOps. I'm going to talk about a little bit about them and their silos. But you can also take it to the wider organization. So have you thought about, product within that? Have you thought about, the wider InfoSec, like, for example, everything that's coming out around phishing? And have you thought about your field team? Because they're interacting with your customers all day, like the whole time. So actually listening to what your customers want, that's what I said about the questions. I'm always really interested to hear the people that have listened to me speak. What questions? What do they want to hear about next, etc. So our silos. Oh, sorry, I've got a quiz, my bad. What is the difference between project mindset versus product mindset? So I find this quite interesting because we are starting to migrate from project to product. And I'm going to talk about a little bit about the semantics. So when you have project mindset, you've got your project, you have your list of deliverables, you complete the deliverables, and then you either move on to a next project or you pass the project on, or you go to the next stage. So, it's very similar to a waterfall mentality. And the thing about a waterfalls don't flow up. So, for example, if there's a problem later down the line, there's less accountability because the person that discovered the problem might not be the person that created the problem. So, and especially when it comes to security, where does security fit in this? Like I said earlier, it's a shared responsibility. It's not the case of security doing everything. It's not the case of developers doing everything. When you move to a product mindset, what you end up with is someone near the top who is responsible for everything. And that can be, responsible, for kind of the P&L and like the teams and everything, but also they're responsible if things go wrong. So all of a sudden, instead of having kind of a list of deliverables, move on mindset, you end up being like, okay, I'm now responsible for our mobile banking app. So if anything goes wrong and we end up on the front page, I am the direct responsible person. So all of a sudden, security becomes higher up at the forefront because you can no longer kind of shove it over to the next person because you have end-to-end responsibility. And I think that's quite important as well when we think about these silos, because it means that we have to have more of a cohesive environment and working style. So here are my silos. We have developer, we have security, and we have operations. And the truth is, as I mentioned earlier, we speak different languages, we have different priorities. I haven't worked in ops, but I have quite a few friends in it, so I've heard the stories. But developers, we like new and shiny things. I can say this about myself. I'm actually really lazy, which I think makes me incredibly efficient. And I think a lot of developers, the whole open source community is, why reinvent the wheel? Let's collaborate, let's work together, and let's, not reinvent the wheel. So because there's always these kind of new shinies coming out, we use them. We might not, if we're looking at open source, yeah, I might check what I'm using at a top level, but how many layers of transitive dependencies am I going through? And when I say that, I mean, if I'm calling a dependency like, I don't know, Spring, then maybe it uses, 20 other dependencies, and those 20, what do they use? And you can have a very simple application, and then I think there's like WebGo, and all of a sudden it has like 100 dependencies, and some are like 4 levels down. As a developer, do I have time or effort or anything to check that? No, because if I said yes, I'd never get any work done, and it could almost be easier to write the code myself. And even then, when it comes to stuff like encryption and like fairly standard security practices, you want to keep with the main ways of doing it, because those people know what they're doing. When it comes to like complicated hashing algorithms, unless that's your forte, I would recommend sticking with best practice. You have your security, and they are stressed. Not always, but I've been in a lot of different organizations in terms of speaking to them. I've worked for vendors for a long time. So I've done the whole of Europe, big, small, government, startup, retail, finance, everything. And the number of developers to security is, a little bit of a worry, like maybe I should add that the eyes looking over there, like, whoa. I've been in all, I think the best I've ever heard is there was 130 developers and 2 security. So that's about 1 to 65. And then I've been in other organizations where it's 1 to 300. And that was a few years ago. So I was like, oh, maybe the world's improving. The 1 to 65 was like last year. And then I got off a call a few weeks ago, and it was, I think it was 2 for 600 or 700. Oh yeah, it was 2 for 700. So that's 1 to 350. So it really does vary. And the thing about this is how, what do we do? How can security cover everything? Which is where we have, great vendor tools that can help, and automation. But actually, what if we what if we make friends with the developers? What if we, empower them a bit to, have these security skills? And then you have operations, and operations, like the friends that I know from operations, they like stability. They're in charge of maintaining. They like, I've got all my square boxes, and then I, look after them. And then developer gives me something that's like, I don't know, tetrahedron, or like a triangle or whatever. Then they're like, and how do I now maintain this? So you end up with these silos. They can be, back when we were all in offices, they would most likely be in different offices. Now everything's remote. Well, we're all remote, but we have to think about, who these people are and what do they care about? What are their motivators? If you're going to, it was actually funny. I was at my parents' on the weekend, and then my, I don't know, I think my dad was like in the way of the dog, and my mum was like, oh, but the dog. And then my dad kind of was like, shrug. But if I flipped it my way, if I want to get my mum to send me do something, like we were talking about getting aircon because we live in the UK and there's heat waves, I was like, oh, mum was like, oh, I don't know if I will, but I'm like, oh, but the dogs will like it because they've got big flat fur. and now they're getting aircon. So, you know, I can do that with my family. You can do that with people in your organization. Find out motivators and find out how to communicate with them. And it's not just DevSecOps. So when we think about your organization, there's going to be a lot of different people, a lot of different functions. So one that's very important to me is product, because we can say we perfect it. We do the cultural transformation, and now we're doing DevSecOps, and it's amazing, and everything's secure, and we're deploying, and all this, and it's magical. But what about if the product we're working on isn't what our customers want? So it's really important to listen, you know, in terms of the product that we're producing. Is it valid? Is it worth producing? Are we doing the right thing? Are we heading in the right direction? Because you know, fundamentally, a lot of people work for organizations. They will have customers. You want to make the product for your customer. So, you know, listening to, you know, what their opinions are and what they think. And similarly with field, I'm biased because I work within the field team, so that's customer facing. And so I deal with organizations all the time. I got off a call earlier today, and they had a lot of questions around security reporting. And it's like, honestly, the security reporting, you know, we'd love to hear that because it will help us make a better product for you. So you really want to make sure that you are aligning the product that you are making, whether it's listening to the field team, product, or customers, you know, so that when you're doing all this DevSecOps, you're actually doing it for a good cause. And finally, this is a bit more of a wider point. This is around, like, say, back office. But I talk about, you know, security champions a lot. And I'm an optimist. I'm like, everyone can be a security champion. Because if you have someone who, you know, gets a phishing email and then they, you know, stop it, and then they use that as like, hey, we've got this, I'm going to report it. I'm going to tell all my work friends, everyone in HR and accounting, look out for this email. You might prevent a you know, really big, you know, security problem, because no one wants to end up on the front page. It is happening more and more often. I don't know if anyone saw in the news a few weeks ago in the UK, someone went after KP Snacks, which do McCoy's crisps and hula hoops. And I'm like, even if our snacks aren't safe, like, you know, take our pipelines, take our waterworks, but don't take our snacks, you know? So it's definitely important to think about every person as a potential security champion, because you're as strong as your weakest link. And you know, there's a lot of links in the company, or a lot of links in the chain. So how are we going to do this? So, a little quiz. How are we going to change culture and break down silos? So I always like to, I've done this before and I've done it live, and this is literally when I just pause and then I just, you know, see what people are going to say. Because it's interesting about how different organizations address this, because you can have, you know, a top-down approach, you can have, you know, bottom-up, and, you know, it's very much about understanding the existing culture. Because maybe you're in a good place and you just want to be a bit better. Maybe you know you're in a bad place and you really kind of want to improve that. So it's really about understanding what the existing culture is. What are the processes? There's a really great book. It's called The First 90 Days. I read it before every time I start a new job, like even from when I was like 22, and it talks a lot about leadership. So I'm like, okay, this isn't relevant. I'm not leading a function or a team. But it's very much, you know, you have to understand what type of organization. Are you doing well? And it's more of a like, let's just keep things, you know, keep doing what you're doing. Or are you in a total turnaround? Is, you know, everything going totally wrong, and actually delaying a decision is more costly? You want to be able to, there's a lot of research around this, is the best CEOs are able to take decisions fairly quickly. And also the decisions they make, if they realize they have made a mistake, they can revert. But it is a balance, because you don't want to be like reverting all the time. And then when you look at the breaking down of silos, so with this, what are the silos? Are they cultural? Are they geographical? Can you know, I'm not going to say let's all do like a team building exercise, but what you can do, this is one of my favorite things to recommend. Hey, why don't we have like a hacking day? And then we'll just take maybe a day or an afternoon, and we'll do like a point system, and maybe there are prizes, and we'll get the developers to try and hack their apps. And, you know, security can be, you know, sitting watching, and operations can be trying to, you know, defend. So, you know, working together, but in a kind of competitive, fun environment. because what you end up with is the senior developers often know about a few sneaky bugs so they can do well. And it's very powerful as well for the more junior developers, or maybe developers that haven't really thought about security, because then all of a sudden they're like, oh, wow, it's really that easy? Like, yes, it is. So this is the thing, when you are breaking down silos, it's important to think about what works best for your culture, for your teams, if there are silos, and also talk to people. I can say all this, but actually every organization, is different. And it's really about understanding, from the bottom up and top down level, what's going on. Because you don't want to end up like this. So this is my broken silos. And what's happened is, so I was in an organization and I like to hang out. There's a couple of Slack channels I always join immediately. So one of them is the gaming one, because it's a really fun place to be. I like video games. And you also get to know a lot of people in product and engineering there. And the other one is just the engineering Slack channel, because I'm like, oh, what are you guys doing? What's going on? Like, just have a nosy around. A lot of it, not a lot. Well, some of it too technical goes over my head. I don't need to know about specific, nuances within commits. But there was one time that I saw this graph, and it was really, really high, and then it was like cliff face, and then it was low. So it had kind of these two levels and a very sudden drop. And in it was like one of the actual head of ops. There was a co-founder. There was a few people. Someone wrote, and it's like, I've worked with these 3 or 4 people. And this graph is our AWS bill. And because of a misconfigured EKS, so Kubernetes, and because of a misconfigured EKS, the pods were like, it was trying to spawn and falling over and falling over. And that's pretty exhausting and expensive. So they said, as part of figuring out the problem, they had reduced their bill from £6,000 to $6,000 to $1,000 a month. And this comes back to my earlier point about when we talk about cloud and infrastructure as code, these little differences, people can, write a script, and I love writing scripts, so no disrespect to that. But if you are introducing these vulnerabilities with the power of automation and of scale, all of a sudden, it can get quite expensive, if not insecure. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Deming and Out of the Crisis. So this book was a while ago. I think, I want to say 82 or 83, maybe 84. But anyway, from the 80s. And what Deming did is he worked with the, so to do with car industry. And Ford was not doing great, and Toyota was doing awesome. And they were trying to figure out, the why. And a lot of what he talked about, so he had 14 principles. And actually, a lot of it is, helped, you can apply it to software. Like one of my favorites, number 5, continuous improvement. He even had CI. Obviously, we have a different I, but it's very much about this iterative process. He talks about, on-the-job training, upskilling. You can do that. You can have security developers, having the right type of leadership. And then also number 8 and 9, driving out fear and breaking down silos. And I think whether you're applying it to car manufacturing or software development, or even, I don't know, family dinner parties, it's really a case where psychological fear is, a problem, because when there are always going to be problems, touching all the words. And it's about how fast can you fix them, and how can you stop them from happening again. If you have a fear of culture, what's going to happen is you're going to probably hide it. You're going to stuff it under a rug, and then it will just, that's the problem with problems under the rug. They grow even bigger. And also break down silos. I'm not going to talk about that too much because I've been talking about it this whole time. But even, back in the 80s, these were, this were the kind of things we were talking about. So I'm going to look at a more modern example. So the Unicorn Project by Gene Kim. If you haven't read it, I would recommend it. I will put my hand up. I'm not much of a book reader, but this is actually it's a fiction. And it's written, the Phoenix Project was the original one, and it was written from the perspective of a head of IT operations, and then they just go to work and everything goes wrong. And it's got a good amount of tech to keep me I feel like I'm learning, but it's actually really helpful to just understand the different personas and how they communicate and interact, etc. When you have the Unicorn Project, it's the kind of the sequel, and then someone, I think she's a project manager. She actually is sick one, she's on holiday, and then something goes wrong. There's a culture of fear, and then basically she takes the fall, and instead of being fired, they're like, yeah, go work on the Phoenix project. You might be able to fix it. And then she, I'm not going to spoil too much of it, but she finds it like simple things, doing a build. I don't think she does a build till about halfway through the book, because she's just trying, and like say if you create a ticket, I need to find this out or what this, and then chasing the tickets. And she literally goes to into the other buildings, into people's desks to try just to do a build. And that comes into our 5 ideals. So the first one, locality and simplicity. So what this means is, can I locally do my job? As in, if I have to get, if I want to commit code, and I have to get it approved by 4 people, and that's gonna cause some friction. Like, can I just, do what I'm here to do? I worked in an organization where I had a Pixel book, and I am quite technical, and I struggled because even stuff like, if I was trying to teach myself Kubernetes at the time, and I've got my Chrome OS, and then they had in beta, they had a Linux terminal, and then I'm in my Linux terminal, and then I'm trying to run Kubernetes. And I just remember, because I was trying to like do some tests and like ping around, and I just couldn't find my IP for the life of me. Like I ended up getting the advice on Reddit after trying 4 different ways of finding my IP. But anyway, it wasn't that easy for me to do my job. And that leads on to the next one, which is focus, flow, and joy. Because if you can do your job, aka development, or in my case, learning Kubernetes, then you can focus, you can get into the flow. And once you start, being in the flow, then you get joy. And this is also, like I said, I do a lot of yoga. So this is kind of the same kind of state where you want to just get into, peace, flow, where you can concentrate when you're adding value. It's like all the positive reinforcements. So you can do your job and you're happy about it. Then comes improvement of daily work. So there's a really great article by Google about SRE, so site reliability engineering, and they talk about toil. This isn't time off and absent leave, because that's what I thought it was at first, because that's the other time I'd heard toil. But toil is about, like, say, when things go wrong, like how much of your work is strategic and proactive, and how much is firefighting, so how much is reactive. And what you want to do is you want to have as least firefighting as possible. I was at a yoga retreat over summer, and I was talking, it's really interesting, the amount of DevOps that aligns with yoga, because I spent a lot of time with the yoga teacher there. But the fire alarm would go off every couple of weeks, like just randomly, and usually in the middle of the night. So then she'd have to wake up and like fix it. And I was like, hey, if we apply the methodologies of site reliability engineering and improving our daily work, maybe if we fix the fire alarm, then we won't have to wake up every 2-3 weeks. We'll only have to wake up when there's a fire. And that's, you definitely want to wake up for that. So it's very much about looking at your job and thinking, okay, is there reactive and unplanned work? How much of a portion of our job is? Because if we're always firefighting, it comes back to the retention and recruitment piece in terms of, I don't think anyone really wants to be firefighting the whole time. And, similarly, we're never going to be able, from the ops perspective, we're never going to be able to turn the pager off, but we can at least minimize the amount of time that's going to go off. So that's what, SRE is about, improving and automating and scaling so that we, aren't firefighting as much. Then psychological safety. I've talked about this a bit, with my Nokia example, but if you feel that you're at risk of being fired, if you make a mistake, for one, just in terms of mental health, that's not great. But also, how are you going to innovate? How are you going to experiment? You need to have an area where you can feel that you can try new things in a safe environment, because that's where you can, produce some of your best and especially your most innovative work. And the final one is customer focus. And I've talked more about customers, of our organization, but also internal stakeholders. When we're working on projects together or just interacting, it's like my earlier, what I was saying about, my family. I know that if I want to, motivate my mum, is to talk about the dogs. My mum tried to motivate my dad by doing that, and it didn't work, at which point I kind of explained. So I was like, you say something else. But anyway, with customer focus, you think about who you're working with, think about their motivators, and think about, how you can work together. The other interesting thing about the Unicorn project is the cross-functional teams. So they had a a team. It was kind of the rebels. And what they would do is they were across all. They had development, they had ops, they had QA, they had someone who'd been at the organization a while, who just knew how to get things done and like knew how it all worked, how to like skip the bureaucracy basically. And that's so important to have these cross-functional teams. But not only that, what you really want to have is high performing teams. So I read a lot of Harvard Business Review. I actually recently uninstalled Instagram, so now instead I'm scrolling HBR because I'm like, oh, I feel like I'm learning something and I find it interesting. But they had 5 things, and I'm going to talk about them. So don't be worried about number 5 because I will cover it. But number 1, they're more strategic with their meetings. So what does that mean? Normally requires, maybe there's an agenda. An agenda is always a good place to start. I'm a classic one. If the meeting doesn't have at least like 2 or 3 bullet points or a sentence, I'm like, why are we here? So yeah, you have an agenda. Maybe there's pre-work. And also if it's a recurring meeting or you're working together on a project, maybe you talk about progress. I have a lot of, status stands up, and it tends to be, what's the status? Like, what's the progress? Are there any blockers? How can I help? What are next steps? That's kind of what I run through in these 15-minute stand-ups. And I try and make them as strategic as possible. They invest time bonding over non-work topics. And this can be good because then it can really help to foster, a sense of camaraderie. All of a sudden, we're not these, machines and robots. If you have an example where everyone, or different people in the organization are into video games or are into, nature. And Slack is great for this because you can just have these channels that people can opt into, and then you can meet some really cool people. Like my last place, the HQ was in Australia, so I never actually got there because of COVID, but I met loads of Australians, and like one of them even LinkedIn DM me and asked how I was. I was like, I'm great, how are you? Number 3, they express appreciation more frequently. So what this is, appreciation should be normal, as in it should be peer-to-peer. It should be top down, up down, down up, kind of everywhere. It should just be normalized because, coming back to the yoganess, there's a lot about being grateful and kind of manifesting and gratitude journals and all this. So if the yogis believe it, but also from the Harvard Business Review perspective, it helps to foster these relationships. And it's not always positive. So they're more authentic at work, and what that means is they're not afraid to bring their real self to work. So it's not always going to be sunshine and rainbows. I am quite vocal at work. For example, if I am having a bad day, whether I'm sick or maybe a mental health, I will just share with my team, being FYI, I'm not fully myself today, just because then I feel that if I'm not performing at my optimal level, I don't feel like any pressure, which at least puts my mind at ease. And the final one, they're not afraid to pick up the phone. So don't worry too much, because I know in general IT people don't like being called. But instead of, what I mean by that is, instead of okay, I email you, you Slack me back, and then all of a sudden, especially when you're doing different time zones, it can be 3 days before you get to the problem. Instead, it's like, oh, okay, do you want to jump on a quick Zoom? Should we just like spend 20 minutes hashing this out rather than doing it for 3 days? So it's very much about being able to collaborate with each other in a fast way when it's relevant. I'm not saying always call people, but there are times when it is really useful. And why are we here? Why are we talking about this? Because if you can deliver better product faster to your customers, and if you can improve operational efficiency and with reduced security and compliance risk, guess what? You're going to drive comparative advantage. You're going to outperform your competitors. People are going to want to work for you. You'll have good retention. You'll have good recruitment. You'll just live in this happy world where you, as an organization, you're doing very well. On the flip side, you don't want to end up on the front page, for hacks, etc. So when we think about this, it's really important, not only on a personal level in terms of improvement of daily work and kind of culture, but also on an organization, because usually if the organization does well as an employee, normally you do well, trickle down, etc. So to summarize, 3 points. Look for and invest in high-performing cross-functional teams. Take a more empathetic approach. It's been a tough pandemic, and I think this is important because we kind of, like, I was just out at a bar on the weekend, and I was like, God, do you remember when we weren't allowed to stand up? Like, and like, say if a good song came on, you could do a bit of fist pumping, but if you stood up, you get told off. And like, I don't have any children, so I fully like sympathize with people that have had to look after either younger generations or older, but we've all just still been working, or most of us have. So, I always find that I always try and be kind to others, because you never know what's going on behind the scenes. So taking a more empathetic approach, stopping the friction and finger pointing and trying to work together can have a massive difference. And finally, remember, DevSecOps is people and culture, not just tools. So thank you so much for listening. I hope you found this useful. As I've mentioned, you can see my channels on the bottom of the screen, and I'm happy, happy to follow me, reach out to me. I love feedback, and if you want me to talk about something else, please let me know. So yeah, happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Stefania. I think I just want to highlight one point that I say one point. There's a lot of points that I wrote down about, but one that really, really resonated with me, which seems quite obvious to sort of overlook very, very quickly, is the concept of appreciation in high-performing teams. I honestly, that is one of the most underrated things. We've got a channel at work in Slack, which is about appreciation, and honestly, just getting a notification that you've been pinged in that channel, it makes your day. It gives you that extra fuel that you need, especially in something like a pandemic. Like, you need that extra love. And I think that people are slowly edging towards like being able to share it. So huge thing there. So got some questions here. So how do you identify silos, and how do you prioritize actioning, like the actions that you do to take, like to break them down? Because the thing is that there are going to be some organizations which are either very slow moving, or they are, they're struggling to move at pace, or they have just a ton of legacy process. Like, how do you help them identify what to do first?
So what you're going to find normally in an organization is you're going to have a mix. So you're going to have some teams that are potentially doing DevOps and working smoothly and working together with their gratitude and non-siloed. And then you might have, I'm going to just call your more legacy. And what you can do, I'm a big fan of, talking to people and listening. And this can be formally, or this can be informally. Just, how's it going? This project, and just listening for the little tweaks. Because if there's a bit of nipping, biting at each other, it's like, oh, okay, maybe there's some work here. Because when you have, it's about the comparison. When you have the non-siloed high-performing teams, then you can say, actually, so this is how this team are working. They have, after something goes wrong, they have a little collaboration a collaboration meeting for an hour just to debrief, figure out, what's gone wrong, etc. So it's very much about looking, because you're gonna have a spread, and it might be everything is quite siloed, or it might be evenly, and it's about trying to see the difference, because you're right, it's not the easiest thing to see, especially being all virtual. But what I'd say is, if you're near the top, take a trickle down and just ask people, like, hey, how are the teams? How are they working together? How are you finding working? Do you know if development and security talk to each other much? Just simple questions like that. If you are at the team or the manager level, you're probably going to have your ear to the ground a bit more, so you'll be able to potentially find out why there might be silos. And it might be there might be, like I say, silly reasons, like me and my Chromebook. That was a thorn in my side. But it might be that it's a case of, QA want us to use this particular tool to submit, but actually it adds an extra hour to our pipeline, or something like that. Because those are the little things that not only cause friction, but can start to like create separation. So I would say, depending on where you are, listening and like having an honest look around, and when you identify them, see who's doing good, and then finding out why, and then suggesting to the rest. I'm like, oh, this team worked well, they do this. Have you thought about doing it that way?
So it's interesting that you mentioned that, because another question was around sort of reactive versus preemptive, or being proactive and everything too. So what you're saying is that there's an element of having to be reactive based on the results that you're seeing within the organization when you try and break down these silos and how effective it's going, right?
So yeah, it's kind of, it varies because I live in a happy holistic where I'm like, let's all be proactive. But actually, reactive is when you can probably make the most change because it's at the forefront. If we're firefighting, when there's finger blaming, especially if there's high tensions. Yes, it is stressful when things go down. But yeah, yesterday, I think yesterday was Monday, I was meant to delete something locally and then I accidentally deleted it in production. And thankfully it was just a commit change. But I was working with a senior person and I was like, what's the quickest way to fix this? And they helped me because I didn't feel that feeling of, issues, like psychological. I felt psychologically safe to be able to admit I've made a mistake. How do I fix this? If I hadn't felt safe, then maybe I would have spent, half an hour trying to figure it out. Could have got it right, could have got it wrong, but it may have affected other people. Whilst as it was a quick 5-minute fix. So I think reactive is when you can at least identify like a lot of ways to make change, but you want to be as proactive as you can.
Yeah, no, that makes sense because the thing is, obviously, you want to be able to make the best decision given the time as well. Because what if you also start trying to make a move or start trying to implement some process, and then a fire starts somewhere else, and you have to like pause it? You got to time it right. I feel like timing is a big part of this as well, like trying to influence change at the right moment.
Exactly. I say, after the fire is a bit done, depending on how bad the fire is, if people are literally at each other's throats, that might be when you take a step down, be like, hey everyone, should we do some meditation? But like I said, there's a yogi me. I'd probably get laughed out of the room at some organizations for saying that. But yeah, it's really about, like you say, timing. You will know your teams and your organization than I do, but it's about trying different approaches. Some things will work, some things might not, and then trying to understand the people and their motivators, and the art of persuasion, etc.
Absolutely. So before I ask another, I do want to just say, for the people who are watching, if you've got any questions, please do ask them in Discord or in YouTube, and we can get them up here as well. So another one is, we're heading. So it sounds. I'm not saying that changing cultures or like breaking down silos is necessarily a load of work. Like some organizations might be closer to having sort of a Nirvana-esque approach than others. But we are heading for a sort of burnout culture as well. Like there are a lot of people who are working a lot of hours. There's a lot of people also like just burnt out from being on Zoom all the time or digitally all the time. So take that one off. So how do you advise organizations or team leads or anything to almost stagger or pace the rate of change? Because some companies, are moving towards hey, I'm happy to take our time with development. We're not going to really, push too hard. How do you find that balance?
Yeah, so I can touch on one of the things you did say. I'll do a little plug. I'm actually doing a podcast on burnout on Thursday. I don't know when it's going to be published, but hey, follow me and then you'll see, because that is so important. And especially with the pandemic as well, it's been it really affects a lot of people. And when you look at security, as I said, they are like overworked. There's a lot of things going wrong, and there's also a lot of change. People are like, yeah, the cloud is fine. It's like, is it though? Okay, if it goes on fire, it's fine physically, but actually in terms of protecting it, it's not. So I think it's also about these incremental changes. Like let's go for the low hanging fruit. Are people physically at each other's throats? Okay, let's get them to just maybe be indifferent to each other. If people just are in silos and not working together, it's like, okay, how can we make people collaborate? Can we work on projects that get different people in the teams talking together? There's something great that Gitlab does where we've got this little bot, and it matches every 2 weeks. I get matched up with someone else in the organization. So my second day at Gitlab, I was chatting to someone in Nicaragua in the jungle, which was great. Or like I showed him all my plants, and then he took his laptop outside, and now part of the reason I'm going there in a couple of weeks. But anyway, it was great because he was a Python engineer and he did loads of stuff with meetups. And I'm like, oh my God, I used to be a Python engineer. So now I know if I ever have any Python problems, I can reach out. So this is part of what I was talking about having bonding over non-work items, because if you're always firefighting and you're burnt out, it's really hard. But there's some really great Harvard Business Review articles about burnout, because if you have your little axis, you can have high mood, high energy. Everything's great. High mood, low energy, like I'm replenishing, I'm calming. And you want to try and move between those two. When you start to go low mood, high energy, That's survival mode. I'm not feeling great, but I'm getting shit done, and like, etc., etc. And then you have low mood, low energy. That's burnout, because you can't even get stuff done anymore. So on a, personal, cultural level and team level, is there a way we can lift it? Like, if we, be like, hey everyone, you've worked really hard today. Like, I'm not going to keep plugging GitLab, but we have something called Family and Friends Day, which is once a month. We get a day off to spend with our family and friends, because we all know how tough the pandemic has been. Not every organization can implement that, but taking a more softly empathetic approach can then help with everyone who's dealing with all of these, fast changes, because you don't want to suddenly change everything overnight. But little incremental steps, like what you mentioned as well, your thank you Slack channel, we have one as well. Like, even that could make a big difference to a personal level, which can then improve the system.
Absolutely. And I think that it's so important what you're saying around, like, sort of, I feel like this has to almost come top down sometimes, like where the leaders of the organization go, you know what, it's okay for me to have a mental health day. It's okay for me to actually take some time off and take the foot off the gas. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And I think that trying to have more leaders try to embrace that approach of doing things is going to be what drives a more healthy balance throughout the rest of the organization. Because, you lead from the front, right? Amazing stuff, Stefania. So thank you very much for joining us. And also for any leaders here watching, please do take a day off. Let us all have some time off as well. But Stefania, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm sure we're going to have you around again soon.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you everyone for listening. Feel free to reach out on my channels. And yeah, look forward to seeing you again soon.
Amazing. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Lots of you joining today. And basically, if you want to get in touch about anything that Stefania's spoken about, please do head to the Discord channel or find her on all of her incredible social media accounts as well. In addition to that, if you are interested in talking at DevSecCon UK or any of the other chapters, we have a lot of chapters now. Head to the website, head to Discord, join one of the channels and get in touch. But for now, that's all from me, and we will see you in March for the next event, which I'm sure is going to be great too. But thank you again, Stefania, and thank you all for joining us today. And if you're watching this playback, if you've got any questions, head to Discord. But it's all from me. Take care, everyone. Bye.